Edgar Badger's Fix-It Day by Monica Culling, illustrated by Nancy Tweenham. Contents: Duncan at the door, a visit from Violet, worn out Henry, Sally speaks up, happy neighbors. Duncan at the door. Edgar Badger loves to fix things, and because he fixes things, he saves things. Edgar saves tired tires and sad sofas. He saved bits of string and metal and wood. He saved everything and dumped it all in his backyard. The pile was getting bigger every day. One morning, Edgar woke up to a loud banging on his door. He waddled over to open it. There stood his neighbor, Duncan Bear. Duncan had a frown on his furry face. "It's happened," said Duncan. "It has?" replied Edgar. He had no idea what Duncan was talking about. "I missed the sunrise," said Duncan. "Really?" replied Edgar. "You want to know why?" asked Duncan. "I'll tell you why. I missed it because of all the junk in your backyard. The pile is getting so big it is blocking out the sun." "Duncan is sure gruff this morning," thought Edgar. "Wait here," Edgar said out loud. Edgar went inside and came back with a toaster Duncan had thrown away last week. "Now your toaster toasts bread and butters it too," said Edgar. Mornings were made for a bit of buttery toast. Edgar closed his door. Duncan just stood there admiring his toaster. A visit from Violet. Later that morning, Edgar was rooting around his backyard. He was looking for a wire and wood to fix a broken window. Violet Porcupine quickly walked up behind Edgar. "This yard is an eyesore," Violet shouted. "Nothing but an eyesore." Edgar jumped up. Another visiting neighbor? That was 2 in one day. But Violet was mad. Her quills bristled with rage. She looked like she might shoot one or two right at Edgar. "Yesterday I was nearly smacked by a runaway tire," said Violet. "It came from your backyard. It was going full speed when it got to my house. I ran out of the way just in time." "How prickly Violet can be," thought Edgar. "Wait here," Edgar said out loud, and he quickly waddled inside. Edgar came back with a hard hat. The hard hat had a telescope on top. He handed the hat to Violet. "Never let runaway tires push you around," Edgar said. "Get your mind off the everyday. Look at the stars." Edgar went back to his rooting. Violet put on her new hat, and she peeked through the telescope. The tiny bird across the road looked as close as her front paw. Worn out Henry. After lunch, Edgar started off for town. He needs to buy nails and paint. The sun was beating down, but Edgar was cool. He was wearing his sun hat. He had made the hat for sunny days. It had a shade umbrella on top. On the road, Edgar met his neighbor, Henry Raccoon. There were dark circles under his eyes. "I haven't slept a wink in weeks," moaned Henry. "I worry about that junk pile of yours. I ask myself, how big will it get? What is it all for?" The sun was high in the sky. Edgar squinted at Henry. "Henry sure does look worn out," thought Edgar. "You need this more than I do," Edgar said out loud. Edgar took off his hat and plunked it on Henry's head. "Here's some shade," Edgar said. "Now take a nap." Edgar walked on. Henry laid down for a nap in the shade. Sally speaks up. Edgar was on his way home. He was loaded down with stuff. He had nails, he had paint, he also had a 3-legged table and a 2-rung ladder. Edgar walked up to his house. Sally Otter was sitting on the back porch swing. What a day for visitors. I know," said Edgar before Sally opened her mouth. "You're sick of my junk." "Well," replied Sally, "that is, your junk is... I can't believe... When are you..." Sally sure is acting slippery today, thought Edgar. You ought to get to the point, Edgar said out loud. Your junk is a mountain of mess, shouted Sally. It's mind-boggling. What kind of neighbor are you, anyway? Edgar was surprised. Sally was shy. She hardly ever said more than 2 words in a row, and she never shouted. Suddenly there was a rustling in the bushes. Happy neighbors! Out popped Duncan from behind the bushes. Out popped Violet. Out popped Henry. He's our kind of neighbor, they all shouted, and he's a good neighbor too. Look at my hat, cried Henry. Now I can take naps in the shade. He danced a happy little jig. And look at my hat, said Violet. I can see the tiny birds. I can see the stars at night. And the moon looks as big as a giant balloon. And just look at my toaster, added Duncan. It toasts bread, it butters bread, and just think, I threw it out. Sally looked at the wonderful things Edgar had made. Edgar does have a way with junk, she thought. Edgar waddled inside and came back with an amazing inner tube. It had a basket for food, it had a cooler for drinks, it had a cushion and an umbrella. It even had a hook for holding a book. Edgar gave the tube to Sally. Here, he said, try this on the river. Why, it's wonderful, said Sally. It's just like home. You are a good neighbor, Edgar. From that day on, Edgar's neighbors were happy, but Edgar was the happiest one of all. He never stopped fixing things, and he never stopped saving things, and he never stopped adding to the pile of junk in his backyard. He just tried to keep it tidy. Because happy neighbors are the best neighbors.